My name is Ava Reynolds, Colonel in the United States Air Force, and I learned how to keep a straight face before I ever learned how to fly. I had to, growing up with a father who measured strength in silence and expected obedience like it was part of the uniform. I wore both well that night, even when the room turned against me. It was his second wedding, a rustic lodge in Colorado, full of polished boots and half-faded ribbons. Old war stories swirled around like cigar smoke. The lodge itself smelled like old cigars, polished leather, and the kind of cologne that sticks to wool uniforms long after the man is gone. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting amber light over metals pinned to suits that hadn't seen active duty in years. The laughter came in waves, rolling through the cabin like it always had when men like my father got together to measure their worth by stories of close calls and long wars. I was standing near the back, half listening, when he raised his glass and said it. "To my daughter," he boomed. "The desk pilot who never left the ground." Laughter roared across the table like gunfire on a range. Sharp and unrelenting. I didn't laugh. I smiled because I'd been trained to. My fingers tightened around the stem of the glass until I felt it give beneath my grip. A soft crack that no one else noticed. He called it a joke, saying it with the kind of grin men wear when they know the room belongs to them. I knew better. To him, I was the daughter who never earned her wings, at least not the kind he respected. Ignore the hundreds of logged hours, the mission planning, the strategy that kept people alive, while others played hero. In his world, real command came with testosterone and a combat patch. I stayed quiet, let the wine coat my throat, instead of words. Let them laugh. But what my father didn't know, what none of the men at that table knew, was that every single one of them would be reporting to me the next morning. The same voices that laughed behind whiskey would fall silent at my command. The same hands raising glasses would rise in salute, and I wouldn't need a toast to remind them who I was. The guest list read like a retired officer's roster. Generals, colonels, war buddies, turned golf partners. Men who had flown missions in decades past, who now clinked glasses and grinned at punchlines they'd all heard before, only louder this time. They wore their pride like it was standard issue. And somewhere between the toast to honor and the joke about women in the cockpit, I could feel the air around me shift. Not with surprise, but with permission. Permission that my father handed them on a silver platter. I should have seen it coming. I knew my father well enough to read the rhythm in his voice before the punchline even hit. He always had a way of dressing cruelty in charm, wrapping sharpness in humor. So no one called it what it was. No one but me. He loved structure, legacy, and reputation. But somewhere in that structure, there was never room for a daughter who didn't quite fit his mold. I was the one who read regulations like scripture, who made checklists out of instinct, who took leadership courses instead of war stories to heart. Growing up, I could recite every airbase he'd commanded before I could ride a bike. But I also remember how he'd dismiss my ideas during dinner, cut me off mid-sentence, and offer a smirk instead of praise. My achievements were always, almost, my promotions, fortunate timing, my ideas, good effort. But, Emble, when he raised his glass and made that toast, it wasn't the words that stung. It was the decades behind them. Every missed birthday turned into a briefing. Every compliment that came with an asterisk. Every handshake ended with advice instead of congratulations. I smiled through it. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew how to make pain look like composure. The glass in my hand trembled slightly, but I held it steady. My mother once told me that dignity is the quiet armor women wear when they have nothing else to defend themselves with, so I wore it like she did. I let the chandelier light catch my reflection in the wine. For a second, I saw a version of myself I didn't quite recognize. One that felt smaller than I remembered. One who almost believed him. Then I blinked, straightened my shoulders, thought of every pilot I'd trained, every soldier I'd briefed, every night I'd stayed late to fix what others left broken. That wasn't the daughter he saw, but it was the officer I had become. Let him toast. Let them laugh. Tomorrow, they'd be standing under my command, whether they liked it or not. Tonight, I'd let the wine speak for me. Tomorrow, it'd be my voice they'd answer to. The snow hit like a wall when I stepped out of the Jeep. Wind cut across the flight line, sharp and unforgiving, swirling flakes around the gray hangars of Edwards Air Force Base. Just hours ago, I'd been standing in a candlelit lodge, surrounded by laughter and whiskey. Now the cold bit through my gloves. I welcomed it. The base looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just gotten used to looking up. Steel buildings lined in rows, antennas reaching toward a sky the color of gunmetal. The place didn't care about legacy, only performance. Inside the command building, the heat barely made a difference. The front desk sergeant barely glanced up as I passed, too focused on a mug of stale coffee and an out-of-date maintenance log. Down the hall, I found them half a dozen senior officers, scattered around the conference table like it was still theirs. Their conversation stopped just long enough to glance at me. One of them, broad-shouldered and already mid-laugh, gestured at a seat near the wall. "Briefings are closed to guests," he said, voice lazy with assumption. I kept my gloves on as I stepped closer. "I'm not visiting." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't move. I could see the second he recognized me. Not as an officer. As the general's daughter from last night's party. Major Kent leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, mouth twisted into that same smirk he wore beside my father's wedding cake. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon, ma'am. Here to drop off something for the old man?" I pulled the gloves from my hands and let them drop onto the table. "No." I unzipped my coat and let the Silver Eagle insignia catch the fluorescent light. "I'm Colonel Ava Reynolds, officially assuming command of Edwards AFB, effective 0700 this morning." The room went silent. Kent's expression froze halfway between disbelief and something that looked a lot like fear. Around him, chairs scraped as men straightened up, some unsure whether to stand or apologize. I walked to the head of the table, steady, unhurried. "You all served under a great man," I said, "but nostalgia doesn't fly planes. Discipline does." The words landed hard, the kind you don't have to shout to make stick. No one moved, no one argued. I gave the room a final glance and dismissed them with a nod. They filed out slower than they came in, glancing over their shoulders like they'd seen a ghost. Behind them, Kent lingered just long enough to mumble, "She's his daughter?" Another voice answered, "God help us." I said nothing. I didn't need to. I just turned toward my new office, letting the echo of my boots fill the corridor. Last night, they laughed. This morning, they followed orders. That was the first lesson. The first week felt like walking through a graveyard, where the dead still thought they were in charge. Every hallway echoed with habits passed down from a different era. Clipboards with missing check marks. Safety logs are months behind. A dozen shortcuts buried under the phrase, "That's how the general liked it." I started with the maintenance bay. Wires dangled from open panels like spilled guts. Machines sat idle, half repaired, half forgotten. When I asked about protocol, I got shrugs and eye rolls. Sergeant Miller looked up from a workbench and said, "We always got it done, ma'am. Paperwork just slows us down." I stared him down until he looked away. Then maybe that's why I'm here. The old command style still haunted the place. My father's voice lived in their decisions, in every corner left uncorrected. I found his photo hanging in the corridor, perfectly framed, jaw set in polished confidence. For a second, I thought I heard him behind me, telling me how things used to run. But that wasn't why I was here. I wasn't here to remember. I was here to rebuild. Kent didn't make it easy. Every meeting, he asked a question that sounded like a challenge. Every directive I gave, he found a way to delay. On the surface, he called it an adjustment. Underneath, it was defiance. One night, alone in my office, I finally pulled up the original placement orders. I'd been so focused on the work, I hadn't looked at the signature line. There it was. General G. Reynolds. My father's name. Recommended by. Not approved by. Recommended. Requested. I stared at the screen. The words didn't make sense at first. Then they did. It wasn't a promotion. It was a setup. A chance to see if I'd fold under pressure. Like he always assumed I would. A test. dressed up like trust. When I called admin to confirm, the young officer on the other end sounded hesitant. He said you were the only one who could fix what was broken, he told me. I almost laughed. This wasn't support. It was a stage, a trap, a message to his old crew. Watch her prove me right. I sat back in the chair, letting the weight of it all settle into my shoulders. It wasn't grief. It was an intelligence failure. My father hadn't trusted me. He had deployed me. And I accepted the deployment with the cold clarity of a tactical officer who had just identified the enemy commander. Outside, the base hummed with night drills. Inside, I stared at the photo on my desk, our shared last name catching the light. 2 ranks, 1 war, and only one of us is still trying to win it. The call came in just after 2200. A training flight had gone dark over the Sierra Range, right as a snowstorm punched through the mountain corridor. Visibility was down to less than 100 feet. Temperatures had dropped to below -20. There were 7 people on board. I raced to the command center, boots striking the floor with the urgency that already lived in my chest. The early report blamed wind drift, pilot error, but something felt off the second I scanned the data. The wind hadn't shifted. Visibility was steady until the descent. I pulled the comm logs and froze when I saw the timestamp. 2 minutes early. An unauthorized command was issued mid-flight. Major Kent's voice was clear and reckless. I didn't hesitate, called an emergency briefing, and made sure every officer involved was in the room. Kent showed up last, leaning in the doorway like he had nothing to worry about. His grin faded when he saw the report in my hand. You ordered them down early, I said, my voice even, against protocol. He shrugged, arms crossed, already defensive. We were testing responsiveness. Your father would have approved. He believed in guts over caution. The words hit harder than he realized. A blade hidden behind a smirk. I kept my tone flat. Then maybe that's why I'm here. To teach this base the difference between courage and carelessness. Kent scoffed. Don't tell me how to fly, ma'am. You're desk brass now. Not a pilot anymore. The room went still. Even the air seemed to wait. I stepped forward, close enough to see the flicker in his eyes. That's an order, Major. From your commanding officer. My voice didn't rise, but it cut through the room like cold steel. Next time, follow the protocol, or you'll be grounded permanently. No one spoke. No one had to. The weight of what happened hung in the silence. Behind me, the radar still blinked, tracking nothing. Outside, the snow thickened. Somewhere in it, people were waiting to be found. And this time, I wouldn't trust anyone else to lead. The storm had swallowed the mountains by the time I reached the flight line. Command had already denied the request for a search sortie. Too dangerous, they said. Regulations don't breathe, I told them. Prep the Hawk. I'm flying. Within minutes, the rotor screamed into the dark, carving through whiteout conditions that erased the world beyond the windshield. Ice clung to the blades. Wind slammed against the fuselage like it was trying to rip the chopper apart. Still, I kept my grip firm and my eyes on the nav. Every readout flickered. GPS blinked in and out. Visibility was gone. We flew by instinct. My co-pilot kept checking coordinates, but I trusted something deeper. I knew these mountains, and I knew how to find what others missed. Then the voice crackled through the comms, barely audible under static. Mayday. 2 men are trapped. Fuel low. It was Kent. I scanned the ridgeline and spotted a faint red flare through the snow, the kind of light that could vanish with a blink. I dropped altitude, ignoring every protocol that screamed for caution. We found them half buried in snow near a broken tail rotor. Kent was slumped against the side, his lips blue, his arm twisted unnaturally. I landed hard, the skids biting into ice. As I pulled him free, his eyes met mine. You came? He whispered, disbelief and shame tangled in his voice. I tightened the straps around his harness. Next time you question a woman's command, I said, make sure she's not the one flying in to save you. He didn't answer, just nodded once and closed his eyes. The blizzard only got worse. On the way back, a turbine froze, and the helicopter bucked sideways. We went down hard, skidding across the ice, until everything went still. Alarms blared, metal groaned, but we were alive. I grabbed the radio, voice hoarse. Rescue 1 to base. Survivors located. I paused, then added, and tell General Reynolds. The desk pilot just landed. I sat beside Kent, covering him with my coat, as the red emergency light pulsed above us like a heartbeat. For a moment, it was quiet. Just the hum of systems trying to hold on. And somewhere beyond the storm, I knew help was finally coming. At dawn, they found us. A line of lights through the snow. Rescue crews are pulling stretchers. Hands lifting bodies. Faces filled with disbelief as they saw who brought them home. I didn't say anything. Just looked to the sky as the storm finally broke, letting the sun crack through like a promise. The message came just after sunrise. Command placed me on temporary suspension while they reviewed the chain of events. Reeves, my father's oldest friend, stepped in like he'd been waiting for the chance. Kent returned to duty, limping, but smug. His reassignment came from high up, a political favor, but I didn't care. He was still under my thumb. I walked the runway alone that night, snow falling again. The same wind that once felt like home now scraped like an insult. Every step forward felt heavier than the last. When I reached my office, I closed the door behind me and stood in the dark. My father's portrait hung behind the desk, staring ahead like he still ran this place. I took it down, slowly, and set it face down on the table. "You wanted proof I'd fail?" I whispered, voice steady. "I'll show you proof I can lead." My hands didn't shake. My jaw didn't tighten. Only my eyes burned. Outside, the storm had passed. But inside, I was just getting started. The message came just before dawn. Command reinstated. Full authority restored. I stood at the edge of the tarmac, watching the base stir awake beneath a sky still streaked with dawn. When I stepped onto the runway, they were already there, lined up in uniform silence. One by one, the claps started. Not loud, not forced, just steady, like something earned. Major Kent stood to the side, nodding once. No sarcasm, no smirk, just respect. My boots crunched against the frost as I passed. At the end of the line stood my father, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on mine. Snow gathered on his shoulders like before, but something in his face had changed. He raised his hand, not with ceremony, with meaning. A real salute. One that carried the weight of every argument, every doubt, every test I had passed. I returned it. "Good to be home, sir." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said what years of silence never could. This wasn't a surrender. It was understanding, and it was enough. The sky over Colorado Springs looked endless that morning, blue and soft like forgiveness. 1 year after the storm, I stood beneath it, no longer as a commander, but as a teacher. Cadets filled the quad in crisp uniforms, eyes bright, with the kind of hope I used to guard like a secret. One of them, a young woman with a scar on her cheek and steel in her voice, stepped to the podium. "Courage isn't being fearless," she said. "It's flying straight through the storm because people are counting on you." The silence that followed was deep and proud. I sat in the front row, holding my father's old compass. Honor above all, etched across the lid, its needle steady in my palm. For years, I thought it was supposed to lead me back to him, but now I understand. It had pointed me home, to the sky that finally belongs to both of us.